What's going on, everybody? So, I like having guests. I like talking about cards. I like hanging out with people. And I've had a lot of guests, and I've been doing more guests than I used to do. And the more I do it, the more I enjoy it. And my most requested guest is who I've got on with me today. And you've seen him before, you've met him before. I've had him on the channel before, but in a little bit of a different setting. But this seemed like an easier way to do this. And so I am bringing on the one, the only MidLife Dad. How's it going, Dad?
It's doing great. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So uh, I've got some questions that I wanted to ask. People love hearing from you. Um, and you don't have you're sort of like Mike Petty in that you don't have your own channel, but you are still sort of world famous. So
Only because you have so many subscribers.
So I'm going to go ahead and ask you some questions. Now, some of these questions are from me, and some of them are from friends and people that you probably know of or may not know of, but you know of them. So I wanted to run through them, and I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on some stuff. Does that sound okay?
Sounds great.
All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at our questions that I have for you. So, my first question is, how has your collection changed over the past 10 years, and why has it changed?
I'm on about my fifth different level of my collection. So the fourth one was about 10 years ago after I had sold all my really high grade cards and made some money from it, and I decided that I wanted the same cards, but so I started collecting those same cards, but I didn't need to have them in 8 holders and stuff. So I would buy really nice examples of cards that I thought were undergraded. And so I was sort of put the same collection together in nice cards in a lot cheaper way than the first time. But now, 10 years later, that was about 10 years ago. 10 years later, now I'm changing a fifth time, and this time I'm changing my collection to the point where I'd like to get my collection to be older than it is. I was predominantly a 58 through 61 collector as a child, and I've really gotten to the point where I really enjoy the cards from, say, 53 to 58 now. And so what I'm trying to do is use the collection that I have and sell some of the cards that I had from the 58s through 61s, sell some of those so that I can buy some of the cards that are older, like the 57 version or the 56 or the 55 or whatever. So that's what I'm in the process of doing, is trying to get my collection to be a little bit older, getting cards that I'd never had before. Whereas the first 3 times through this, I was always buying the same years over, and then stopping and then starting and then selling and then buying them back. And so now I'm into the point where I'm looking to make my collection older, still the golden age, so to speak, not the Gaudis, not the T206s, not the cards of the 40s too much. In fact, I don't have any cards in the 40s right now, but maybe someday, I'm not sure. But so that's how it's changed.
Now, the other thing, just to follow up, and I don't want to get too far into the weeds on this because there is a question coming along these lines, but so you went from high grade PSA slabs.
That was like version 3, and
So that was about 10 years ago.
that was more like 20 years ago.
And you sold those about 10 years ago.
Right.
And then you bought lower graded copies and were they in PSA slabs or were they raw?
They were in PSA slabs, but I took them all out, which no human being does these days. But at the time, I wanted them to be raw again. And when I started getting back into it, I realized if I was going to do any changes, then they needed to be graded for me to change them into something else. So then I took cards that were once graded, and then now that they're graded, now they're graded again.
So you took cards that were in mid PSA slabs,
Right.
bought those back, cracked
Right.
them out, made them
Mm-hmm.
raw,
Mm-hmm.
and then some of those you're now liquidating. So you're now regrading them, and you are now selling some of those to buy older stuff.
That's exactly that.
And and out of curiosity, how have the grades done? So if you bought mid grades, say you bought a 5 of a card in a PSA holder that you cracked out, when you regraded it, how have most of them done?
Um, my strategy when I was buying them was to buy cards that I thought were undergraded, and I look at a card and I say, well, this should have graded higher, and that's one of the reasons I bought it, because I thought it was a really nice card. And so when I went back to have them regraded, a good percentage of them came back higher grades than I took them out of.
So the older grades were lower than the newer grades, but when you regraded, did you regrade PSA or did you regrade SGC?
I regraded SGC because I had done some of it with PSA, and it was a little frustrating because I felt that they didn't come to the standard that I thought they should have. I mean, I didn't do hardly any at all. I really liked the SGC dynamic better than I did the PSA. First of all, you've got them back center. I love the holder way better. They're
We're
much
going to
more.
talk more about slabs here in a second, so I
Oh,
don't want
okay,
you to give too much away.
okay,
Um, but just to quickly summarize, if you bought a card in a PSA 5, you bought what you thought was an undergraded PSA 5,
right.
cracked them out, recently send them back into SGC, and in a lot of cases, they came back at a 5 or higher if it was a 5.
Almost all of them came back in at least the grade that it was. A lot of them were the same, but a lot of them came, slightly. Of course, another thing that SGC does is they do half grades. So I might have gotten a 5.5 out of a 5 that was at PSA, which if they did half grades, they might have, I think they probably would in most of those cases, because again, I was buying hard cards for that particular grade, strong, really strong cards for that grade. So I think a lot of them probably were half a grade if PSA went to the trouble to do that.
Okay. All right, let's look at our second question. So, next up, we got the National coming up in less than a month. You've been to several Nationals. How many Nationals have you been to?
Now, you asked me that once before, and I'm probably going to give a different number than I did that time. So I know that I said I've been to San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago a couple of times, Cleveland, and Atlantic City. So what was that, like maybe six, something like five or six,
Okay.
at least. Yeah. So
Um, to someone who's going to their first or their second National, what are a couple pieces of advice that you would give? And I'm not talking about wear comfortable shoes. I mean, it- strategically speaking, you walk into this giant room. Uh, you're standing next to my buddy Mook at the VIP ticket line, waiting to get in, and he says, "Okay, what are the two pieces of advice you can give me before I walk in?" Your pieces of advice, having been to more than a handful, would be what?
well, if you've done a little studying, and in other words, everybody probably has some kind of a list of what they particularly would look for. I would think that they should have an idea of what they're willing to spend. And if they see a card that's on that list at anywhere near that price, they should buy it. The idea of shopping around, trying to find a better, that same card at a cheaper price, the idea of going back and finding where you last saw that, or if it's still there, even because somebody else might have bought it. So I would say if you see something at a price that was going to be within your wheelhouse, just buy it, because there's a really good chance that you may never even see it again.
So even if it's
Either,
your first table, you pull
oh
up
yeah,
to your
yeah, I
first
wouldn't
table.
hesitate. No, if I pulled up a first table and I saw a 1957 Willie Mays, which is one of the cards I'd like to buy, and it was right at the price that I felt like was in my wheelhouse. First table as I walked in the door, I'd buy it.
Okay. I'll give you a second to think on a second piece of advice, but I have a follow-up question. So, and it's funny because some of this stuff that I'm asking you, I know how you're going to answer because we've talked about it, and some of it I don't.
Hmm.
This is a question that I don't. So, say you blow through all your money in the first 5 hours at the National, and you're going to be there for 3 days,
Hmm.
and now you're out of money, but you've got some really cool cards.
Right.
What do your next 2.5 days look like? What you for you? What are you gonna do the next 2.5 days? Are you gonna go, refinance the house, or are you gonna go? Are you gonna, just walk around and treat it like a museum? Are you gonna just tag along with a couple of friends and be their wingman and help them negotiate? Like, what does your day look like if you've gone through all your money?
Number one, all of the things you just said. Um, in addition to that, I would be a lot more selective, but if I found something that I just had to have, even though it was beyond what I planned on spending, I would get more money and buy more cards.
That's a good answer. Um, what what do you have another piece of advice, or is it just the one that's really strikes you?
Um, well, the one thing is if you decide that you're not going to take my first advice, which is when you see the card, buy it, find a way, give yourself some notes on how you could go back to that card that you saw that you liked, because I can't tell you how many times the first time I saw a card, it was perfect, and I've looked a lot of other places, and they were never as good or a good a price as the very first one I saw. So
Hmm.
you need to make, if you decide not to take my advice to buy it right away, at least know where it was.
Hmm.
So write yourself some notes so that you know where to go back to take another shot at it. Again, that's only if you don't take my first advice.
Right. Yeah, I mean, from my understanding, the Cleveland room is a little bit more symmetrical of a room, so it's a little bit
Yeah,
easier to re-find where you were as
yeah,
opposed.
I think that's true.
And I know there are some offshoot rooms at Chicago. The next 2 years, it's in Chicago. Um, so I think that from what I've heard, that is a little bit,
Easier to do.
different. I also think we have some technology that a lot of us just forget about, like potentially just turn on your video on your phone, just record yourself. This is the booth that has the,
Mm.
57
Yeah,
tops
yeah,
Willie Mays.
yeah,
Show it, show the dealer, show the room around you, and then turn it off. You
yeah.
could take advantage of some of the technologies that we have.
Yeah, see, I didn't come up with that because the answer to most questions that people ask me wouldn't come have anything to do with technology.
All right. Well, we got you
I'm
on
an
here.
old goat.
We got you on here, so you're good. All right. Next question. What are you most excited for in attending this year's national? So it's been a few years. What year would you say was the last national you attended?
Oh, it was a long time ago. It was before I got married. Um, it was um, 2004 or 5, maybe something like that.
Okay.
Maybe even a little before that, somewhere in that range, early
I know
2000s.
I know you went in 2000, and I
Hmm.
think in 2000, if I'm not mistaken, it was in LA.
Oh yeah, I went several
That's
times after
that,
that.
that's the year you almost got a Wilt Chamberlain autograph,
Yeah, yeah.
and you
So
decided.
yeah, so I would say it's probably more like 2005 or 2006 would be the last one I went to.
Tell me the
But
story about the Wilt Chamberlain autograph.
Well, he was signing. It was there was like 3 autographs I wanted to have. I mean, I wasn't really an autograph person. And even though I'd gotten them at different times, and they were like sometimes you'd go somewhere and they were free for somebody, then I would always get it if it was free, get a card of them and get it signed. But there were 3 autographs that I really wanted to have in my collection. Arnold Palmer was one, Joe Montana was another, and Wilt Chamberlain was the other. And I didn't
And this
mention
is this
Mickey
is
Mantle. Did
yeah.
I say Mickey Mantle? Yeah.
No.
Okay. Okay. Mickey Mantle, of course, too. But so I guess 4. And this was an opportunity. I didn't realize he was signing at the show, and I made my plans around going Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and he was signing on Saturday. And I would have had to change my flight, and I'd been walking around for 3 days, but it was something I really wanted. So I strongly considered when I found out he was signing the next day. I strongly considered changing my flight and going back, but I eventually decided not to, and kind of have some regrets about that. I really like to have that.
I remember that because I was in college and you called me on the phone and were telling me about the show and how it was going, and you were like, "Yeah, I'm thinking about Walt Chamberlain," and I knew that also the next day Muhammad Ali was signing,
Oh,
and
that's
I don't know
nice.
if you remember this, but I said, "Well, if you stay,
Right.
will you buy a
I
ticket? I'll
remember
pay
that
you back."
conversation. I
Yeah,
remember that
I
conversation.
remember where I was sitting,
Yeah.
and it was like, you're either gonna stay and get Wilt Chamberlain and Muhammad Ali, and then you were like, "Well, if you want me to stay, I'll stay," and I'm like, "Well, I don't want you to stay just to get Muhammad Ali for me."
You should
You're
have
like,
said, "I want you to stay," because I'd have Wilt and you'd have Muhammad.
and you would have met both. You would have
I would have
stood
met.
next to both.
Oh yeah.
It wasn't long after that Muhammad Ali stopped doing public signings because his
Right.
condition got to where it got. But
He couldn't do
um,
it. Yeah.
so I don't even know. Did we answer this question? What are you most excited for in attending this year's national? We haven't even answered it yet. Where are you at on
Well,
that?
it's the first time in almost 20 years where I'll be there with one of my boys, and that makes it really special. In fact, I think there's only once before I was there with both of you. That was the San Francisco one. That's the one where we got the Jerry Rice and Roger Craig autographs on those
Action pack cards.
action pack cards. Yeah. So that's going to be really fun. I'm really interested in meeting your community has been so nice to me. I'm really interested excited about the opportunity of meeting some of the people in person. They've been so supportive of me that it warms my heart to know that I will get to meet them.
I don't want to put you on the spot, but are there any in particular people that you're like thinking you're like, I definitely want to talk with that guy for a little bit? Is that
Yeah,
putting
you're
you on
putting
the
me on the
spot?
spot because I
Okay.
like a lot of people, but the ones that come quickly to mind is of course the Mookster,
Right.
because I've had conversations with him on the phone and stuff.
So
And
just to let everybody know, Mookie and I have a tradition that every time we're on the way home from a card show, we call each other and tell each other how the card show went. And we've been doing that for a while now. And so, whenever I go to a card show, you're with me. And so we're on speakerphone. So it
uh-huh,
ends up being kind of a three-way conversation about how the show went.
hmm
So you do have that relationship with him.
right. And Theo has kind of reached out to me a little bit from time to time because I've responded on some of his um, his shows, and
Yeah.
and Sammy's been nice, and
Chris
um,
from Missouri told me, he said one thing I want to make sure of when we're in Cleveland is I want to make sure I get a chance to buy your dad a beer. I was like, what
I'm
about
down.
me, dude? What about me?
Well, that's so. Add him to that list.
Yeah, yeah. You
Cool.
definitely have to get the free beer out of Chris. So,
Yeah.
all
So
right.
anyway, there's a lot of them. There's so many nice people.
Oh yeah,
Again, I know that they don't know me, but I see their shows, so
Right.
I feel closer to them than they would to me. I'm sure
Sure.
in most
Sure.
cases.
Sure. All right, let's keep looking here. Next question. This is from my guy David. So this is our first guest question. He says, let's say you have a high-end raw card or have high-end raw cards to grade from the 1956 set. The price and the turnaround times are identical. So if it's a 30-day turnaround, it's for both.
Hmm.
And the price is
So
$15.
Fantasyland, huh?
Fan- yes, Fantasyland and PSA finally gets it together as
So the
far as for
price is the
turnaround time.
same and the turnaround's the same.
Yep.
Okay.
Which do you grade with, and then tell me why?
Well, to me, the difference between PSA and SGC. Now, again, my whole 80% of my collecting days, I was only in PSA holders. I've since changed to SGC within the last maybe 2 years. Um, I prefer the SGC holder. Not that that should be the only focus. I like the way a card looks in an SGC holder more than I do in a PSA holder. So there is that. Um, I feel like the customer cooperation and stuff. Again, we're acting as if those were the same, though, aren't we?
Yeah.
Everything's the same except just one or the other.
Hmm.
Um, I would say the thing I like the most about SGC over at PSA is that they SGC seems to be like a collector's grader, meaning they go by on eye appeal,
Hmm.
and so they grade on eye appeal, and PSA has a tendency to take some obscure little thing that's not even hardly visible on the card and just nail it for that, because of this minuscule little imperfection. And that annoys me a little bit because if I can't even see something, I feel like the cards I like, SGC will grade higher,
Hmm.
and the cards that I like, PSA will grade lower.
Hmm.
And I'm sure that they have other things where SGC grades harder on certain things than PSA does. But because I've heard people say that they think that SGC grades harder, and I don't see that. But it may be because of an imperfection that I don't focus on.
Hmm. So if you had a few cards that were high grade cards from the 56 set and you were to send them in, same pricing, same turnaround time, you would send them.
To SGC.
Okay.
I'm sending everything to SGC. If I had newer cards, which I don't have and don't plan to have, I might be more tempted to grade PSA. But the only thing with that is newer cards are notoriously up and down. And by the time you got a card back from PSA that's newer, it may have completely different price point than when
Yeah.
you send it in. So there's that problem too. So if I
So
had
here's a
newer cards I was going to keep, I might grade PSA. If I had newer cards that I was going to turn, um, I don't know if I'd send them to PSA or not. But the thing is, newer cards really almost have to be in PSA. I don't,
This isn't a prepared question. This is a response to that question. But what is your take on newer cards?
um, I can't relate to newer cards because of the fact that you get did you get the purple version or the golden version or the platinum version? This one's got this many, and this one's got only has that many. It's like I don't want to dwell in that world. It's I like the charm of older cards rather than the splash of newer cards.
Hmm. What about newer cards with older vintage players? Does that change your opinion at all?
You mean the fact that they'll have a Willie Mays card, maybe even autographed before he sadly
Yeah.
passed? But um, I don't have a lot of interest in those either.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. If I wanted to get a Willie Mays signed card, then it would cost me a fortune. I really wish that when I had the opportunities of getting Willie Mays and Hank Aaron, all those guys for $5 an autograph, that I didn't do any. I feel like a complete idiot for not having done that.
Yeah. Okay, next question. Just I guess maybe as a follow-up, just in general, what's your opinion on grading companies? So, I mean, you kind of talked about your preferences for SGC and why. What do you think about grading? Because you went from everything was high grade PSA to
Oh, even before
out.
that, everything was high grade raw,
So
and I
you went
stuck with
everything was
that for a long. I stuck with that for a long time.
so you went everything was high grade raw. Then you sent them all in to
Hmm.
PSA.
Right,
And then you sold those. Then you
right,
bought mid grade, cracked them out of holders because you didn't want
right,
them in holders.
right,
Then you were PSA, and now you're SGC.
right.
So, just as a whole, what is your take on the whole grading cards thing?
Well, grading cards changed everything because you know whenever when cards weren't graded, everybody that was selling cards was making it sound like their card was way better than it really was,
Hmm.
and so their prices were always really high, and so there was it sort of made it as a collector you could be a little more protected from unscrupulous people that were selling things. Everybody charged too much money for cards before they were graded because they always would act like their cards were better than they really were, and therefore you should be paying more for them.
Hmm.
So that's kind of a good thing. I never liked having cards encapsulated, which is why for so long I was raw all the way and nothing else. I mean, I had a binder of just pristine, 572 1960 tops cards, and every card was like pristine in it. And I liked looking at them because you could turn them like that. Then you put them in holders, and you got these 3,200 count boxes, and it takes three of them to hold your collection, so you can really look at them the way you used to like to look at them. And so that was the part that was hard for me. And that's why I was so stubborn about not grading them. But when I knew how good my cards were and how much value they had as a graded product, um, I didn't really have a choice.
So you felt like you had to grade them because the added value of grading those high grade cards was just too much.
Right. It was too much to ignore.
And then you decided to part of the reason you decided to sell them, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, so how would you finish that sentence? The reason you decided to sell most of them, like the set, is because
Well,
what?
in my 1960 set, I had the entire set and a PSA 8 or better in all but about six cards. And I had some nines, so it was overall it was a eight set. But so I'd go for a low population common that somebody never heard of, and people were bidding like $250, $300 and stuff for a card that literally they didn't even know existed, but they needed it for their set. And so after witnessing that for a while, I'm saying, okay, my collection is worth more to those people than it is to me.
Hmm.
So instead of trying to compete with those guys, I'm going to start selling to those guys.
And so these guys that were buying them for $250 to $300 for a common and a PSA 8 holder, you started selling them to.
Yeah.
Are there any recognizable names that maybe would have bought a few of those from you?
Yeah. Marshall, but he had the number one. I don't know. There's like 3 year sets in a row, and he bought a couple of low pop commons from me, and he says, "Do you have any more?" And I gave him a list, and I told him what I wanted for him because I've been charting how much they'd been going for, and he bought Marshall Falk, isn't it? No,
Marshall Fogel.
Fogel. Yeah, I got him mixed up with a football player. Um, yeah, he bought I don't know, maybe 30 or 40 low pops from me, and paid the going rate at the time because I was basically like his finder fee person. It's like he's instead of him having to go online and looking for them, he could just pay me and get the whole slew of them. So
And now, didn't you meet him
I
after
met
that?
him. I met him at the National. I don't know. He may not even remember this stuff now, but I
No,
met him at the
I doubt he
National
does, but yeah.
in the National that was in Cleveland. That's the one where I got my 58 uh, mantle and an 8. And I met him, and I was with a couple other buddies that I'd met online. They were collectors like me in the same years and stuff. And we had a conversation, short conversation. But yeah, I did meet him.
Um, okay, and then yeah, I don't want to. I don't want to force this into a direction. There was another conversation that I'm aware of that I thought would be interesting, and now I'm forcing it, so I might as well just keep going. You spoke with Joe Orlando on the phone once.
I did.
How
Oh, more than once.
how many times did you speak with Joe Orlando on the phone?
2 or 3. And then
And
I spoke to him at shows too.
did he? I mean, I know this is 20 years ago, but did
Hmm.
did he know who you were?
Um, no, I just introduced myself. I've been sending that 60 set in, even the commons and everything. At the time it was $6 to have them graded. So it was like, I'd make money by selling some cards, and then I would send a bunch of cards to get graded, and they were being what I thought was pretty harsh. So I called them up and I said, look, I've been sending cards to you by the hundreds, and I really think that there's quite a few of them that you have undergraded. And being a set builder, that's gets pretty expensive for me. Although it'd be way more expensive now, but at the time I always felt that it was expensive because I was basically, a single dad, not a rich guy at all. So, which I'm also not now. But at any rate, I said I'm kind of dissatisfied. And he says, okay, well, bring up the most egregious ones that you have and resend them. I'll have them take a look at them again. And they did change the grades on some of them.
Did they charge you? So this is probably before they had the review process, or is this after they had the review process? Because you could take a card from PSA that say has a 7, and you could send it back in and have them check it. Did they
Yeah,
have that option at the time?
I don't think they did. They didn't charge me anything. I sent them to them. They sent them back at no charge. I mean, that was PSA when it was customer friendly.
Hmm.
It's not customer friendly in my view anymore. So, I mean, I don't want to poison the minds of your viewers.
No, I think that your experience says is, it's fair game. And I think that there are people, even some of the biggest pro PSA people are well aware of some of the faults and situations in which PSA currently resides. So
Right.
I don't, yeah. Now you mentioned something a second ago, which I'm going to bring up, and then I'm going to pull up the next question, which I think is a perfect transition for it. Which you said you used to find some nice commons and get them regraded or get them graded to make
Hmm.
a little bit of money. So
Right.
with that, I want you to expand on that in a second. But first, I want to share with you the question from your old pal Mook, which is he says, Coach, now Mookie is aware of the fact that you were a basketball coach for 30 years, so he calls you Coach. Um, you're someone who has tried to fund your collection by finding undervalued items and reselling them for a profit. He says he has 2 questions. His first question is, can you explain to someone who doesn't resell you get satisfaction from collecting that way, and maybe included in that, explain what you meant a second ago when you said you bought commons and had them graded to make a little bit of money.
Well, back in the time when I was buying these really nice commons, it was PSA was on the ground floor of just getting started, and there were people that were beginning to try to put the sets together, and there were literally some cards where there'd be only one or two of them in high grade, and I got to the point when I was going to nationals at that point of knowing what those cards were. So I would go through commons binders, find really nice examples of those really rare cards, send them in to get them graded, and then take them and sell them. Like I gave you the $300 common one, the example.
Mm-hmm.
I would literally, I went to a national and bought a high grade, low pop common and sold it for what it cost me for the entire trip to go to the national. And that was fun to be able to do. So literally I'm playing on everybody else's dime.
So
And
take me through that process here. You basically know the pop report of these
in
sets
my head,
in your heads. And a lot of the dealers didn't, obviously.
they had
You're
no
flip
idea.
you're flipping through the binders. You go, that's one of the low pop ones. I
Gold,
think
that's gold, that's
I think
gold,
that
that's gold.
card's an 8. I
Yeah.
think that'll get an 8 because you
Hmm.
had your eye dialed in because you had been sending a lot of cards in and you knew what it needed to be an 8. So
Exactly.
you're then picking these out. How much are you paying for these commons at that time?
$5 or $6.
So you buy it for $5. It's $6 to grade through PSA. So you
Right.
do your bulk submission with 40 cards in it or whatever,
Hmm.
and then you're taking those commons, like you said a second ago, and selling them for $200 to $300 to Marshall Fogel.
In some cases. Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Oh,
and
I don't know. Marshall maybe bought a couple that were at that price. I mean, it ranged. I mean, that's like the more extreme kind of example.
sure.
I mean, I would, if you pay $6 for a card and 15 to grade it, and then sell it for 125, that's still doing really good.
Yeah.
So it's like they weren't all 300. They
Right.
were like anywhere from 75 to 300.
Now you get a lot of satisfaction from playing with the house's money.
Absolutely.
What is
Well, that's how I put my whole collection together. That's how
mhm.
I paid for everything I had graded.
How much money do you, I mean, and you still are doing it this way. You're still
Um,
basically
not with
trying to do
commons. Not with commons.
right.
I'm minor stars and stars now. People don't grade commons anymore. I mean, they do, but if it doesn't get an 8, it's worthless.
Right. Uh-oh, did I lose you? Are you there?
I'm back.
Okay.
Um,
You said
uh,
if it doesn't get an 8, it's worthless.
yeah, I mean, I see guys on Whatnot are trying to sell a PSA 5 of a 1960 Commons of somebody you never heard of, and they can't even begin to get anywhere close to their money back before it costs to grade it. I
Mhm.
mean, the price of PSA now for grading is so high that no one is going to try to put a set together anymore because they're grading harder, so you can't get good grades,
Mhm.
and they're worthless unless you get high grades.
Mhm.
So the only people that are changing on the registry now are people who are buying the whole set from somebody who was previously the highest person on the thing, because
Right.
anything new is not getting an 8. I mean, it's just really rare for something to get an 8 now.
So I'm gonna put. You and I see eye to eye on most things, but if I'm somebody listening right now, a few minutes ago you said that you bought cards for 5s, you cracked them, you sent them back in, you got higher grades, and
Sometimes,
now
yeah.
you're saying that
Those are
grading.
star those are star cards.
So okay, and so you think star cards fall into a different category than
Oh,
common?
absolutely, yeah, yeah,
So you think
yeah.
they grade commons harder or star cards
No, I
harder?
think they grade all cards so hard that it's hard to accumulate a common that has a high grade without paying a fortune for it. So most people are not going to pay. And we gave the $300 example for a common. I mean, all the 8 commons are now probably somewhere in that range. And if you put a set together that's got 572 cards, and it's $300 just for the commons, we're talking about an insane amount of money. I
So
mean,
you think that
hundreds of
PSA has
thousands.
killed set collecting by their harder grading?
Yes,
And
a
but
graded
just
set
I
collecting. Yeah.
I don't want to belabor the point, but I just want to make sure that I'm clear and understand because again, I don't disagree with you on any of this, so don't think that I'm doing that. But you if you had a card that was a 5, you cracked it, resubmitted it, and got a 5.5.
Hmm.
How do you say that they're grading harder now?
I'm saying that I bought it because I thought it was undergraded. And so, therefore, the proof that I got at least the same grade was that they had previously undergraded it.
Okay, so you're saying the only reason that's possible is because they messed up the first time,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
even in spite of their tougher grading, they still graded it more appropriately.
Yes.
And it's also a different grading company.
It is a different grading company. And again, it's an eye appeal grading company instead of what I call almost a robotic grading company that looks at imperfections in a way that's just way over the top.
So PSA being the robotic grading company that
Yes.
looks at imperfections way over the top versus
Right.
SGC who looks more at
Yeah,
eye
that's
appeal.
just my opinion.
Yeah. No, I
Yeah.
know. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Mookie's second piece of his question is: do you have any good stories about reselling an item for a big gain? You just gave a couple about paying for your national trip.
Right.
Um, do you have do you have any others that you would want
Well,
to
I just
share?
I bought one on Whatnot, a raw card. I think it was from Orlando Pulse, um, and he had a 1966 Willie Mays, and it looked really nice to me. And so I said, if it goes for under this amount, I'm going to be in on it. And I ended up buying it for $93. This is a raw card.
Hmm.
I bought it for $93, and then I sent it into um, SGC to get it graded, and I got a 6. And 6s go for in the 400s, and I sold it on eBay.
So
And
that go ahead.
that's an example of seeing a card, seeing that it was a high grade card, and not getting much in competition on the grading. So I came out ahead on that one,
Okay.
and that's the most fun
Yeah.
because now for $400 I can buy a card that I really want that I might not have spent the money on before if I hadn't
Right.
had that.
Right. Okay. Next question is from David. What is a card that you were sure was going to go up in value, but hasn't gone up in value, or has maybe even gone down? Um, I'll if you can't think of one, I'll throw one out there for you. But is there a card where you're like, oh yeah, this has a
Are we talking
future?
about new cards or old cards?
Anything.
Well, back in the '80s, you thought the rated rookie for Conseco was always going to go up. Before I guess as soon as you got to the point you realized how many of them there were,
Hmm.
that maybe that was not the case. But if you're talking about an older card, I thought a Burt Blyleven rookie would go for more.
Hmm.
Uh,
Why do you think a Burt Blyleven rookie doesn't go for more? Because he's one of those guys. If you look at his stat sheet, I mean, and you look at
3,000
his career,
strikeouts. Yeah,
achievements, and I mean, one of
almost
the best
300 wins.
curveballs of all time.
Right, right.
And why? And it's from a brutal, famous year.
Oh
This
yeah,
rookie card,
it's from a
71
year
top.
that's the hardest year you could argue is as hard a year as any year.
Hmm.
That and 62 football, and then some of those gold foils from the Tito's fives, I guess it is. I might have it
Yeah,
wrong.
it's
Um,
225.
yeah. So those are like the ones you say, oh, what are the ones hardest ones to get in nice condition? Yeah, I thought a really, and I don't know what it goes for, but I know I bought one online the other day that looked really nice for $5. And again, I think it'll go for more than that. I'm not online on Whatnot. I'm we're selling at a show this weekend, and I'm gonna have it out for a lot more than $5 to see if anybody. But it's interesting how there are certain players that there aren't near enough interest in for what they were to the game.
Yeah.
Whitey Ford is again. Of course, Casey is the one that screwed up Whitey. Um,
Tell
because
us, yeah, tell us. So you've long said that the reason that Whitey Ford doesn't get more love is because of Casey Stengel.
yeah,
Explain that. I know your answer, but explain that to people watching.
yeah. Well, Casey Stengel would hold Whitey, not have him start as often, and would always start him against the best pitcher from the other team. So he wouldn't pitch every fourth day, or at those days it was every fourth day. He would pitch against whoever the ace was of the other team. So every time that Whitey pitched, he was pitching against the other team's best pitchers. Okay. And he still did really well because he was a great pitcher. The first year after Stengel was fired in 1961, Whitey was, I think, 25-4 or something. He won 25 games the next year, and he won a bunch the year after that and the year after that. And that was the only reason he didn't have more wins before that is because he didn't pitch as often, and he only pitched against the very best pitcher from the other team. So that's going to cut down on your wins big time.
Hmm.
And so that's why I'd say that, Ralph Houck could see the forest for the trees and was pitching Whitey every fourth day, and he was just racking up wins at that point. But that's 10 years into Whitey's career.
Right. All right. So I think those are some good answers. I really like the Purple 11 poll. That's
Yeah.
a great one. Okay, let's go ahead and keep plugging along. This is from my buddy Darren, Return to Collecting Darren.
Okay.
Yeah, he says, "What have you learned about collecting strategy over the years?" And he says, "This is a question coming from a dude with 8,000 lists of cards and can never focus." So,
Yeah.
what do you think about strategy? So, if you're talking to a Darren who you'll
Hmm.
meet, Darren, and that's another guy that when we were talking
Hmm.
about who you're looking forward to meeting, I know you're looking forward to meeting Darren too.
Of
Um,
course.
um, you're talking about what strategy, what advice would you give to a collector like a Darren who can't focus because he's going in 8 directions at once?
Well, first of all, I'm sorry for not including Darren earlier because I liked, but the only problem when you start asking
I
people
know.
about
I set
people,
you up.
you
I
go,
set
yeah,
you up.
you set me up for
I know.
failure,
I
and
know. I
I'm
know. That's
holding
my.
you directly responsible
I'll take the
for the fact that
responsibility.
Darren came up this late in the conversation.
I know. I'm sorry.
So collecting strategies. Well, from a person who's changed their collecting strategy about 6 different times, I don't know that I'm a really good person for collecting strategy advice.
But you have
But
learned from those
yes,
changes. So what have you
I,
learned? Like, what would you
what I've
say?
learned for me, and it's not for everyone, but for me, I've learned that what I really want to have is I have somewhere between about 40 and 100 cards that are really special to me. And all the other cards, because I don't even know how many I've got. I've probably got 1,000 cards right now. But I want to end up with 40 to 100 cards that when I look at, they make me smile.
Hmm.
And I'm not into like any type of set building. Oh, by the way, the last time you interviewed me, I told you that I was going to get completely out of basketball and football, and I would soon not have any of either one. Since then, I've put together an entire 1969 basketball set. So,
Well,
so much for that strategy.
let me throw this out there too. I said, "Will you ever build a set again?" And you said, "Never."
Right.
And that was your quote to that question.
No, that's what
And
that's why I'm bringing
yeah,
it up.
yeah, and you
Yeah.
since have built the '69 basketball set.
By the way, it's for
Um,
sale if anyone's interested.
if you want a 1969 basketball set,
They're
go ahead.
really nice cards.
Yeah, and go ahead and I'll put my dad's email address in the description below if you want to reach out to him. Um, so, okay, so you would say what
Oh, the
then there?
strategy wise,
Yeah,
my strategy now is what I just told you, is to focus. I don't want to have more cards than I can look at, and I want to be able to have the cards where I could sit down in 45 minutes to an hour and just enjoy looking at them, and have that small a number of cards so that I just have, I don't need a really sharp 1957 Gil McDougall.
hmm,
I like Gil McDougall, but that doesn't bring me the same entertainment as a Yankee Slugger 1957 of Mantle and Berra.
right.
And even though I'd have to sell 100 Gil McDougalls uh, to get one of the Mantle Berras, I'd rather have the Mantle Berra.
So you are a person who would recommend, for yourself at least, the consolidation factor of
Oh, oh,
yeah,
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 because I can't look at it all,
yeah.
and I want it to be easy to look at. That's what I loved about the binder days. Is because I could go through the binder in 20 minutes and look at a complete set of just pristine, perfect cards, and I like that.
Hmm.
Um, but at least if they're all in holders because of their great value, I can still get one nice um, container for graded cards and look through it in you know 30 to 45 minutes and enjoy them.
One of the things that I thought was really good advice that you gave me years ago about buying a house is the fewer times you can buy a house, the better, because
Hmm.
every time you buy a house, the fees are so exorbitant that you
Hmm.
you, you lose. You're treading water.
Right,
You're opening the plug on the bathtub as you're trying to fill it up,
right.
and to a certain extent, it's sort of that way with cards, with like
Hmm.
eBay and stuff, because the eBay fees and the taxes when you're buying and all that
Right,
stuff just eats away at
right.
your card profits and your
Yeah,
card money.
yeah. Your card
But
collecting dollars are going down the drain.
would you say you would recommend that? Because I've always kind of said, it's okay to change your mind about your collection.
Yeah,
Like if you if you're Darren and right now you're really into, well, I'll just say the pre-war stuff, and then you decide I don't want the pre-war stuff. I just want to have a dynamite 1950s collection. That's okay because you still have the card values. But then
right,
when you sell the cards,
right,
you're losing. Then when you buy and you've got taxes, you're kind of losing.
right.
What do you think about changing your mind? Is it's obviously okay to change your mind, but
It's
is it one of those,
expensive.
it's expensive to change your mind.
That's right. It is.
So the sooner you can figure out what you want to focus on,
Yeah,
the more money you'll have for the cards to focus on.
right. That's
Yeah.
perfectly true.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's a good analogy.
Is that my last question for you? I guess that's it. I thought I had one more, but I
You said you
apparently
added one at the very end.
this was Darren's.
Oh, that was
Because
Darren's. Okay.
he just sent it to me a few minutes ago. Um, I mean, we've been talking for 55 minutes
Have
now.
we? Boy,
Yeah,
that was a fun 55 minutes for me.
yeah, yeah, me too. Oh, that was really fun for me. It's fun because whenever we talk about this stuff, a lot of it I know your take on,
Uh
and a
huh.
lot of it I'm always you're always telling me a few things
that
that
you didn't know before.
I didn't know before. So it's fun when there are turns in the conversation where I'm like, oh, that's cool. But I mean, like I've said many times, like, a lot of the times that with card shows, the drive to and from the card show
Yeah.
is a lot of the fun,
Oh,
not just
absolutely.
being at the card show. Sometimes being at the card show actually kind of sucks, depending on how
Yeah, that's
crowded
true.
it is,
Yeah.
and you get frustrated because there's stuff that you like, but it's overpriced. And
Yeah.
um, well, I think, because one of the reasons I wanted to do the setting this way is because before, when I had set up in your living room and I had two cameras going, and it's a ridiculous amount of editing. I mean, just hours of editing for me.
Oh,
And
okay.
it's also hard for people to hear both of us because the camera's either facing you or me. And so it's hard to hear the other person. And
Right.
the audio is impossible. So this,
Right.
it's way more conducive to having a conversation. So um, I I think that, if we were to start doing this a little bit more regularly, would
Hmm.
be fun. And I know people are always curious and asking different questions and opinions about things. And your background is very different than mine. Now, I was along the way with you for a lot of
Hmm.
your collecting and hearing how it was going and all that stuff. So
Right.
I, you know, it's definitely interesting to hear your take, because with you, in a lot of cases, it's asking about things that have happened. A lot of the stuff that people will ask me is a lot of kind of theoretical stuff, like what do you think is going to happen to this, and what do you think about
Mhm.
projecting this, and
Right.
it give opinions. But I think that hearing your actual experience with some of the things that you've been through is super interesting too. Um,
Yeah.
what I would
Well, it warms my heart that you included me in this. It's a
Oh
lot of fun.
yeah, yeah, for sure. I also thought it would be fun to do a video as we're getting close to the national, knowing that you're going to be there, knowing that a lot of these people will be there, and so just kind of a refresher to them of reintroducing you to them, because it's been a little while, maybe, I don't know, maybe 4 months or something since we've
Hmm.
done one of these, and so I wanted to do that before the national to kind of remind people of that, because we're going together, and
Hmm.
we're going to be there Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and you're going to be at the Thursday YouTube get together, and we're still finalizing some
I
plans
don't know
for
if I
Wednesday.
qualify, but
No, it's not just for people who make stuff, but you do,
uh,
like you're here. But it's for anybody. And that's the
mhm.
thing, is if anybody out there wants to go and say, hey, I love Chris from Missouri. From Missouri is going to be there. Chris from Missouri wants to meet you. He wants to meet
I want
anybody
to meet
out
him.
there. Yeah,
He's a nice guy.
he's a
I don't know if I mentioned that,
fantastic
but I'm really looking forward to meeting Darren.
guy. That was
Since I
mentioned
left
at one
him
point.
out earlier.
Yeah. That's funny. That's funny. But if you have a question for my dad, and let's plan on doing this. Let's plan on after the national. So the
Okay.
national's less than a month. Coming back, we'll tell some of our stories, do a little recap of the
Okay.
national, what you bought, how it
Right.
went, what the
Right.
gatherings were like. And
That
then
would be fun.
in addition to that, if anybody out there has a question or two that they want to throw out there to ask you from your experience, in
Uh-huh.
the comments below today,
Hmm.
just type out what that question is, and I'll grab a handful of those so we can kind of share post national wrap up,
Okay.
plus some questions for you that people might have. Does that sound good?
Okay. Sounds fantastic.
All right. Well, with that said, it's been an hour. If you're still out there, we appreciate you guys listening. I never know how long people stay. Some people love that I have long videos. Some people make fun of me for having long videos. Either way is fine with me. I had a good time talking. So thanks, Dad, for coming on.
My pleasure. Thanks.
All right, guys.